And so everything that you record or perform is absolutely perfect. Well, you better believe that perfectionism has a downside attached to it. And that's going to manifest itself somehow in your life or in your career. And that's going to impact your manager and your team.
Welcome to Music Career Therapy, brought to you by artistmanagers.io. Whether you're just starting out or looking for new ways to grow your existing career, thanks for joining us on Music Career Therapy. All right, welcome to Music Career Therapy. Our guest today is Wayne Martin. Wayne has done a great many things in the music industry. Thanks for joining us, Wayne.
I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Just to get us started, so people get to know a bit about all the many things you've done, could you just give a brief background of your career and maybe some highlights?
Sure. I can actually divide it into thirds. So I spent the first 10 years of my career working at the major labels, Warner Brothers, Sony Music, and all of their affiliated labels. Then I spent about 10 years at the independent labels, running independents and consulting independent labels. And then I spent about 10 years in intellectual property and licensing. So everything from Harry Fox to interim CEO of a publishing company, trying to understand all of the money flow on the song creator side and copyright owner side. And then the last 10 years, so it's not thirds now, it's quarters. The last 10 years as a music manager, taking all of that and kind of rolling it into my company now, which is M3, Martin Music Management. Out
of all of those, is there some that you found most rewarding out of all of your various quarterly careers?
Well, I did them all for a specific reason. I always wanted to be an artist manager. And when I was working at the major labels, I had opportunities to take some of the artists that were signed to Columbia and to Epic and work with them in that capacity. But I didn't feel qualified. It was very red carpet oriented. There were lots of big budgets. There were shiny plaques and big parties. And that was all fine and good. But, it doesn't always work that way for everyone. So I wanted to experience a little bit more of the independent world. What do you do when you don't have a 7-figure checkbook to try and break an artist? And so I went the independent route for my own edification and so that I would feel more qualified. They were both completely fulfilling, but in super different ways, because one's very DIY and one is kind of, going against the odds. And the other is like rolling in a machine that is well equipped. You're in a tank when you're at the majors or were at that time, and you were on a bicycle when you were at an independent. Rolling in was a very, very different experience. So they were both super fulfilling. I loved my work at the labels more than anything.
Did you find that the indies had like a different philosophy than, say, the majors? And was there something about the indies that drew you there after being with the majors?
It was just that I wanted to step off of the red carpet. I wanted to be kind of in a roll up your sleeves. What are our resources? How do we make this happen? People would take my phone call when I said, "Hey, this is Wayne from," right? I could get into restaurants. I could get into meetings. I could make cold calls, and anyone would just pick up the call because I'm calling from an establishment. When you're an independent, that goes away. It's stripped off of you. And so what does it take when you don't have an entree, right? And that was the big dynamic change. That was the paradigm shift, was not having an entree.
Yeah, I'm very familiar with that. I worked for the Grammy Awards for about 10 years, and I rarely had a phone call that wasn't returned.
So exactly, right?
Yeah, it makes a huge difference when you have Grammy.com in your email address and stuff. Like people like that.
Absolutely. And rightfully so. I mean, there's no judgment attached to that, but it does create a different kind of import when you get an email from that address or you get a phone call and that's the name that you're dropping. So I had my reputation, but I also needed to figure out a way to navigate through a system that, celebrated kind of where you worked and not how you worked. And so that was a very different world and eye-opening for me and very helpful training to become a manager.
I'll bet. I've read through some of your work and also, followed some of your social channels. And I know you talk about mindset, which is a hugely powerful practice for a lot of successful artists and business people. Can you describe just what that means and how someone can cultivate a successful mindset?
Sure. It is a mantra at M3 and with all of my clients and with significant number of our partners. Mindset is more than attitude. It's one thing to wake up to the day and say, well, yeah, I'm going to approach all of my challenges and we're going to knock everything out of the park. And here we go. Watch us win. That's great. That's a good attitude. But mindset means that you can return to that even when you've just been knocked in the gut. You can return to that even when things are really tough. You can return to that if something in your personal life or in your family life outside of your career is impacting you in a really heavy way. Mindset allows you to come back and clear out anxiety or concerns or fog or whatever it is so that you can stay focused on what is in front of you. And we use mindset training constantly. In fact, we have built a producer roster over the past 18 months for the very first time. And that roster is built on mindset. That was the foundation of it. So do you have little Victrola, Grammy Victrola sitting on your, behind you on your Zoom? Or how many plaques do you have? Or how many Spotify awards can you point to? And that we brushed all of that off. We said, that's not how we're going to do this. So we didn't. And it's been a dramatic change in the way that I work every day because everyone comes to it with an open mindset. And there's a lot of buzzwords for that right now. If you follow Simon Sinek or any of these, business coaches that are out there, which I happen to be a huge fan of, the Golden Circle and those kinds of philosophies. But if you follow those leaders, those thought leaders, you understand that infinite thinking and mindset are really the foundations to success. And this goes back to the Stoics. This doesn't have anything to do with the music business. This doesn't have anything to do with those people. It doesn't have anything to do with this year. It has nothing to do with any of that. It has everything to do with how we approach the world. And what we found is no matter what happens in any of our clients' careers, we have our relationship to fall back on. And that is incredibly powerful. It's probably the gem of my 40 years in working with creatives and marketing people, is that there's always the relationship to come back to. And it doesn't really matter. Relationships are bread and butter. And to that end, I go back to something that David Skepner, when he was living and working with Loretta Lynn and the Dixie Chicks, he told me something that I have carried into M3. That it's very sage advice. And David said that, he said, what is the most important element of a manager-artist relationship? And I thought, gosh, I could probably narrow it down. And he said, it's time. You've got to have time. I thought, well, I make time. I have weekly calls. We have, I'm available. I'm not that manager. And he said, time is needed because there's two things you can't do immediately. There are two things that you have to develop with time. And one of those is trust. Michael, you could say, I trust you, Wayne. I read your credentials and listen, I'm going to take your advice because I trust you. But you can say on a superficial level, yeah, well, I trust him. But do you trust me? Are you willing to sacrifice based on a really intense trust? Are you willing to compromise on a really intense trust? No, that comes over trials and tribulations. That comes over time as we know one another, as we learn how to communicate. And that's the second thing that he said. It's time because of trust and communication. You have to learn when someone's hearing you, when they're not hearing you, when they're hearing you the incorrect way. And you don't do that just over dinner. You don't do that, after 6 or 8 weeks of taking calls and just kind of warming up to one another. You may understand, yes, that's his vernacular, that's his language, that's his jargon. I understand how he speaks, but what can you see beyond that? Can you see what's resonating and what's not? And are you hearing what you need to hear? And are they doing the same thing? And are they willing to evaluate things the same way? So we put that into practice. We do not sign anyone without a 6-month, we call it, it's marriage. So we date for 6 months, which means I meet the family. I meet significant others. I meet the children. I meet the grandpa. Whoever. We go to dinners. We do that's one of the ways that we onboard at M3. We want to build in that time. So we talk about life and we talk about work and we talk about goals. We do that over a period of time. And after about 6 months, usually, that seems to be the sweet spot, we offer a ring and that, we get engaged and that means the contract goes out. And so do you want to do this? This is not hiring someone to do press for you for 90 days. This is a long-term, long game kind of philosophy. So we do the ring ceremony. Here's my attorney, here's your attorney, and here's the paperwork, and let's see if we can get through this. And then I walk away because I'm on the opposite side of the table from my potential client, and that's the most uncomfortable, unbearable place for me to be. is to be trying to figure out how we're going to solve a problem that doesn't exist. Well, what if this happens and what if this happens, right? So I hate being part of that. That's the bane of my existence, and I turn it over and don't have any conversations as a whole at that point. And then if the attorneys come to agreements or have questions and we can get to the right place, then we get married. And when we get married, then we have already done a lot of we got a prenup, right? In case things go terribly awry. We understand one another and we put in the time. So we know how we communicate and we know that we can trust one another and that is an ongoing development. It doesn't happen around one event. The trust deepens over time.
Wow. That is so powerful and so helpful to hear. One of the things that we hear on artistmanagers.io is a lot of artists will say, I'm on here because I want a manager who sees my vision to take me on and be my manager. And I write frequent emails recommending, well, the reason you would come on here is so that you can meet a lot of managers, first of all, to find who suits your style, who's in your genre, who understands what you're trying to do. And then once you've built a relationship with some of these people over the course of many meetings, that's when you might begin finding your pathway to the manager. And it's such a hard thing for artists who want to just get moving with their career to let go of that. So it's really cool that you have this process that's so deep, because I don't think you could run management relationships any other way. Like, trust is so critical.
Yeah, thank you. I found it to be a necessity.
Yeah.
I found that the floor fell out of the car more often than not because we hadn't built a relationship. We understood one another. We both wanted the same things, but we didn't. But when something went awry, right? When something didn't go the way it was supposed to, which happens all the time in every business, then it was like, well, but Wayne, you said we should do this. Okay, but if you trusted me, you would know that at that time, that was our best option. If you don't trust me, then you're going to say, wow, my manager really messed with me. He really screwed things up. And so I needed to get out of that headspace for everyone. And so having the ability to be real with one another, that is a luxury, and it costs me a lot. There's an opportunity cost for that. I invest a lot of time in getting to know people that I never do business with. When we launched our producer roster, I spoke to over 100 producers in a span of a year.
And how many did you end up taking on?
The first year, 3.
Wow. 3%
and
selection.
Some of them, yeah, right. But it wasn't that they were all looking to be represented either. I was trying to find out what worked for them, what didn't work for them. I was doing my own, reconnaissance to find out what's in the market, what's not in the market. What do you love about your manager? What did you, why would you want a particular manager? I was asking a lot of questions. So it was a vetting process to some degree. But it was also just an education process for me. One of my favorite things, about this whole, being patient, that whole idea of having patience and looking at the long game is it takes 6 months to build a Rolls Royce, right? It takes 6 months for people to make all of those pieces and to assemble them by hand. But it takes 12 hours to make a Toyota. So you get a car either way. But which car do you want to drive? Which career do you want? Do you want one that's sustainable, that's long-lasting, that's generational? Or do you want something that's going to get you over the next hill, but in a couple of years, you're not quite sure what it's going to do for you?
Which leads me to the next question I was going to ask you is, I know you all at M3 also focus a lot on strategy, and that's one of your pillars. How do you work with artists and develop those strategies, and at different stages in a career, perhaps? Like, what's the way that you develop strategy?
I think the only way that strategy can be outlined is to first understand that it is a moving target. One of the reasons we don't write marketing plans, I've written 1,000 marketing plans for labels and for artists. One of the reasons we don't do that is the day that you print it, the day that you email it, the day that you save it as a PDF is the day that it's no longer completely accurate, because the world continues to move around it. So if we're going to build strategy, then we have to understand that it's kind of, it's jello, it's moving, it's breathing, it's on its own, and it's not a static. This is what we're doing, and this is how we're going to get there, and we'll talk about it again, in a couple of years. You can't focus that way. So we do, for recording artists and for music producers, M3 has some, again, basic structure. And that structure is that we have quarterly goals that we come to together with our clients. So we're coming up on a new quarter, which means that all of the calls to recap what this quarter was like are now being scheduled. We're going to sit with every client and say, okay, so these are the things that we outlined that we wanted to accomplish this quarter. What worked, what didn't work, where are there hiccups, are there things that we want to take off the list, or the things that we want to roll over to next quarter? That goes back to my record label training. Everything's done on quarters, right? Financials, marketing, all of it. So we just kind of stole that from that structure. But we also have, and that's very collaborative. Strategy has to be collaborative. It has to be, well, that's not what I want. Yeah, but if what you want is Y, then we have to do X first. And so let's do X, and then we can do Y, right? So you kind of lay it out and walk them through. I find I'm a tour guide. Right? Coming up on the left is this, coming up on the right is that. We need to be prepared that we're going to run out of gas and we're going to have to gas up again when we get to this point. Like, I'm always way out in front. It's my publicist training that did that. Wow, the most valuable thing in the world, right? To be able to juggle everything at once and do triage, right? But strategy is triage. When someone goes into the emergency room, someone has to evaluate what has to happen first. And that's our mindset. That's our approach. But the recording artists and the music producers that we're lucky enough to work with, they actually have an opportunity to name what we call a wildly important goal that is a yearly goal. And we have no influence over that at all. So that can be, well, I want a sync agent, or I want a record deal, or I want to headline the Troubadour. I want to, whatever it happens to be, right? I want to tour with so-and-so. They get to name that goal without any feedback or influence from us. The thing that we try to do is then back into our quarterly goals and say, well, if that is the goal, then let's make sure that we're addressing it as we go through the year, and in addition to addressing other things. So it's a process. And one of the ways we're able to stay on track is that we do have weekly calls with every single client and partner.
Wow. And how many clients do you all have?
We're never going to cap at 10. I've run businesses before. I don't want to run a huge company, so we're trying to stay really small. So between the artist side and the producer side, we're hovering at 6 right now. We're going to be up to 9 by the end of the year. We won't ever be above 10.
Never above 10. Wow. And how many people do you have on your team?
The team, we have someone in operations in New York. We have someone in business affairs in Nashville. And then we have our go-to outside partners that we utilize very, very regularly. We keep it very lean and very tight because I want to be able to cherry pick partners that are right for the projects. We'll have 4 employees by the end of the year, and we're not going to have any more than that. There's no need for it.
Wow. So you work with a lot of contractors who are doing kind of specific skill sets that they're experts at, rather than kind of keeping everybody in-house to handle all of that?
Exactly, because every artist has different needs and different goals. So I don't need someone who's going to be a specialist in physical distribution working on my team full time, because we may not have but 2 or 3 projects that involve that in a given year. So that doesn't warrant a full-time salary. When we need PR, we have access to the best and brightest in the business. And what we don't want to do internally, we can outsource. Outsourcing is a very powerful way to get the best that you couldn't afford to keep internally. So we work with some of the best branding minds, the best marketing minds in the business and otherwise.
That's brilliant. That reminds me of the book, Who Not How. I don't know if you're familiar with that one, but it is a great mindset. Basically offload those things that you're not best at, and you're always reaching for the best people you can get to do those specific skills that need to be tackled. Great way to run a business.
Well, it's smart, Michael, also just to say, it's really smart. When you hire a manager, hopefully you're hiring a generalist. Mm-hmm. And that generalist has enough knowledge to know when they need a specialist. So that's what we do. I work with some of the best people on the planet, and I'm so proud of our teams of partners because they bring such bravado and knowledge and insight that I don't have time to keep up with. So we just brought on one of my favorite branding experts who you could watch television for 30 minutes and see 2 commercials that he was responsible for, huge corporations. And he's coming on board to help us lead a 2-year campaign for one of our clients. I couldn't do that. I don't have that breadth and scope. I understand it, but I don't have it.
Mm-hmm. I think that the strength of being a generalist is recognizing that very fact. I also loved a quote from you that said, "I wouldn't wish fame on anyone." I've known a number of people who have gone through the fame ringer, and that we call this podcast Music Career Therapy because you can't really run a music career without also taking care of your mental health. And the music industry is just a minefield for mental health. How do you coach your artists around their mental health? Just talking about mindset. What are some of your strategies to keep your artists grounded?
Wow, that's a great question. I'll go back to our standing one-on-ones. I have one-on-one with every client every Thursday. I'm on the phone for 12 hours straight every Thursday. It's my favorite day of the week because I get to connect with the people that I represent. And it always starts with, how's your head? How's your head? What's going on? Tell me about what's going on at home. Tell me about your life. But we don't get into like, okay, so here's an agenda for the meeting. And, it's one-on-one. It's just me. It's not anyone else on the team. It's not any of our outsourced partners. Every Thursday, it's just me. And we get real with each other. It's reciprocal. They say, how are you? Right? How are you doing? Are you holding up all right? You said you were traveling a lot last week. Did you get some rest? So like there's a real authenticity here. There's a real baseline human connection. And when you establish that baseline human connection, not only does it give you, the elasticity to be able to withstand the things in the career that aren't always fun, but it also gives you that ability to check in with someone and go, hey, are you okay? And I actually, when we onboard clients, we have a 100-question questionnaire, and it's very personal and intense in terms of like, who do you use for your mental health? What kind of medications are you on? What have you been on in the past? Are you having cognitive behavioral therapy? Are you under the care of a psychiatrist? Have you ever been treated for addiction? We have all of those questions, and that comes to me only also, right? So completely private and protected, but also necessary to understand. David Sketner, again, he's at mine today. He also told me whatever drives an artist up is exactly the same thing that's going to drive them down. So if you're a perfectionist, right? If you're a perfectionist and so everything that you record or perform is absolutely perfect, well, you better believe that perfectionism has a downside attached to it. And that's going to manifest itself somehow in your life or in your career. And that's going to impact your manager and your team.
Mm-hmm. It's such an important part of any business, of any person, just to be able to be grounded and to, take your breaks and do all the things that you need to maintain good mental health. I've always felt that it's been one of the most overlooked pieces of what happens when our artists implode, because we see it happen all the time. And as you had said, fame, it feels like one of those sick fairy tale jokes that you want this thing so badly, and then once you get it, it can become one of the greatest curses of your life. Do you have artists that experience that at all, or are you kind of coaching them in a way that keeps them grounded and in a better spot?
Well, I don't leave it up to myself, again, as a generalist, right? I try to take temperatures, but that's so that I can pull in resources if we need them. But I've seen some people go through some really rough things, and we watch it play out, as you say, in the media all the time. Fame is not what people expect it would be. I think when young artists in particular say, well, I want to be rich and famous, that fame part of it is to validate their creativity and their expression. I think they want that more than they want not to be able to pump gas at a gas station. I think they want that more than to have armed guards walking the perimeter of their property. And I know situations where that exists. I mean, do you really want people with guns patrolling, a wall that you've built around where you live? Like, is that the side of fame? You see, it's all the shiny objects, right? It's all the red carpets and premieres and the social medias, and that's fine. It is fun. There's nothing wrong with that at all. But the downside of it is that when people know who you are, that means everyone knows who you are. And that means people that don't have necessarily positive agendas or positive mental health themselves. And you have to be aware of those things. And having someone who's watching, training someone to be famous to me is very fulfilling, because it's always enlightening. There's always these ahas. And to watch someone understand how to move through the world in a new and different way, like, that's powerful, and that's validating for me.
What exactly does one do to train someone to be famous?
Well, that's a great question. When I was a teacher at NYU, and before the Clive Davis School was established there, I was asked to teach courses on marketing songs, marketing artists, and marketing recordings. And one of the foundations of those classes that we created there was to understand that marketing music and marketing celebrity are two very different things. So when you see Justin and Hailey Bieber on the cover People magazine and they're talking about whether or not they're pregnant. That's marketing celebrity. That has nothing to do with craft. It has nothing to do with a new single. It has nothing to do with a tour, right? That has to do with the fact that they're celebrities, they're famous, and that there's one way to deal with that, right? Not everyone that is a great musician is famous, and not everyone that's famous is a great musician. So you have to be able to understand the difference between the two. You're either marketing celebrity or you're marketing art, but either way, you're marketing people. So preparing people for fame means that you set up some default settings, some controls that will help them in the process, helping them deal with rejection, helping them deal with negative feedback and commentary, making sure that they're connecting with their inner selves and taking care of themselves and staying rooted with people that they trust and have trusted their whole life. Not controlling their social circles, but making them aware that there are a lot of people that want to exploit them, and that's not in a good way. We want to exploit them, right? As managers, we want to exploit them, but that's a positive exploitation, right? And I don't mean that in dirty, gross ways. I mean, we want to exploit their talent and the way they look and the way they move through the world and the way they think and the way they express themselves and the way they make people feel. We want to exploit that. We want that to blow. But the other people want to exploit them for their money. They want, when you have money, it's very different when a family member calls you and says, "Hi, how have you been?" "Oh, hi." Right?
Yep.
So that's a piece of fame too, is that private phone call from Aunt Becky that you haven't seen since you were 7. And Aunt Becky saw you on the cover of a magazine and decided, you know what, maybe I can get a little bit of that. So you have to be able to talk to people about those kinds of things. And the only way really, I think, to be prepared to have those conversations is to have lived it with other artists.
One of the things I've noticed about the way that you approach your business, you don't list your client roster. You're very in line with this conversation. That keeps your clients safe, and it also keeps you safe. How, as a manager, do you navigate through the world when you're kind of keeping your cards close to your vest around who you're working with?
There's a million different reasons why we don't list our recording artist roster. We are public with our music producers because it's a very different job. It's actually a very different job for them and for us. One of the most detrimental things that I think artists do while they're seeking validation, while they're looking for the next right thing for themselves and to grow their own careers, is to compare themselves to other people. And that is really toxic. And so to keep that under wraps and to not have people look at other people that we represent and say, well, how come they got that tour and I didn't get that tour? Like that undermines all the mindset things that we're talking about. So we're just eliminating those things from the conversation, right? If you don't know, like my music producers don't know who the recording artists are either. And I had one producer say to me, well, at what point are you going to tell me who you represent on the artist side? Because, maybe I'd want to work with them. And I said, well, here's the thing. Maybe I wouldn't want you to do that for a particular reason. And if it's not a match, it's not a match. And even if I tell you, hey, there's no way in the world that I'm going to blend these two rosters together, you're still going to go to sleep at night and you're going to say, one day, Wayne is going to let me produce that person, right? If he knows who that person is, right? One day I'm going to co-write a song with that person, right? That's distraction. That's, we all have to, sometimes it's like forced blinders. I just put blinders on everyone because it keeps things healthy. Look down, stop comparing yourself to other people. Let's do the work. And then when things come, they come. And that's a beautiful thing. I find that, clearly the labels, the agencies, the PROs, they know who we represent. But in terms of putting, our roster out into the public conversation or showing up for Zoom calls with plaques behind us, I find that is a lowest common denominator, shiny object approach to management. And I learned that from other managers years ago, is that, the less you are about the hype, the more people understand you really are about the work and the relationships.
That makes a lot of sense. I really am admiring your approach to the music business because it has a sort of Zen feel to it where you're really trying to keep things balanced in a way that leaves the distractions outside. And I know you mentioned it with the influence of the Stoics and other philosophies. And it seems like you have a very clear vision of how to channel all of this. Where did that come from?
I think over time, as I evolved as a person, I understood that I could run a business that had principles. I told my attorney the other day, he said, oh, well, he emailed me and said, I applaud the decision you made. And I said, well, principal decisions aren't always the most, beneficial to business. And right.
Right.
And I want to work with people that are principled. I want to respect the people. You meet enough managers and enough label executives, enough A&Rs and consultants that pick up the phone and go, oh, I can't believe. They look down and they see who's on the ringing, and they're like, I can't believe I got to take this call. And I thought, God, I don't want to live like that. I don't want to work like that. I've worked with all the people that I don't want to work with. I really have. I've been forced to market people because I was in a position at a corporation, right? I've been forced to interact with them. And I just decided when I launched M3 that I wasn't going to work with anyone I didn't want to work with. And that's not me being petty. That's not me being, exclusive. That's me saying, wow, this should be a positive experience for everybody. And just because there's so much dreck in this business where people can get rich fast, and we attract look, nobody has to go to college to be a manager. Like, I didn't have to fill out a form. I didn't have to be licensed like an agent. Like, I just had to say, guess what? I'm a manager. Well, if anybody can do that, then why don't we just raise the standards a little bit? And so moving through the world with this kind of philosophy really came from witnessing all of the ways that things do go wrong, and that relationships fall apart, and the people that are on the top of their game call up their managers and go, you know what, you're out of here. Wow. Okay. What brought that on? Right. So is that because we have a bad relationship? Is that because you're one of those people that says, hey, the grass is always greener? Why would you take a team of people that brought you somewhere and do something so dramatic and so drastic? Why would you sever ties to what actually gave you, the attention, the power, the career power that you have? Mm-hmm. So all of that went into it, just watching, you learn a lot there's a great acronym, WAIT. Why am I talking? Right? Like, just shut up and watch. Shut up and watch. You learn a whole lot of stuff that way.
I have not heard that acronym before, but I love it. That's fantastic. I have ADHD, so I have a tendency to overtalk. So it's really, I'm writing that one down.
Well, they say my clients and the people that work with me, they laugh because I never shut up. Like, I just don't. I'm always out there ready to flap my jaw about something. So when you have opinions, I think that comes with the territory.
Yeah, it definitely does. So a couple more questions. One, you list on your services that you guys are growth advisors at M3. And what does that look like for an artist, especially when they're just starting to have some success? Like, when you're bubbling up an artist into the mainstream, assuming you're not always working with higher level artists, which you may be. What does a growth advisor do, and how do you enable that?
That really goes back to the metaphor of the tour guide, right? We're going on a journey. And so, there's lots of paths in front of us, and we can get to the destination a million different ways, right? So we can take the interstate, we can take back roads, we can take a plane, we can take a car. Like, you have a lot of options in front of you, depending on what you're creating and how often you create. So if we plug those two things in, then we can figure out, well, what's our method of transportation and how fast do we think we need to get there? And it comes back to strategy too. It comes back to, well, what's the next right thing? And what do we have to accomplish to get to the ultimate goal for the next, 12, 24 months? So what is it that we're trying to do to get there? And are we willing to change course? So as a growth advisor, it really is that I over-communicate, as if you haven't just found out. I over-communicate, and that's probably one of our strengths, is that we're constantly rehashing and reinforcing certain ideas with our clients about how we're getting to somewhere. So if someone says, I had someone come to me 6 months after signing and say, I need my big break. I need it now. Like, I don't know what's happening. Like, we've been working together for 6 months. And where is it? And I said, okay, hold up. At what point did we say that at 6 months there was going to be a big break? Where did that expectation come from? Did I say that? Because I don't think I said that. If you dreamed it, if you believed it, and you never communicated it, then we've got a problem. So let's step back for a second. Because if you're losing sleep because someone's whispering in your ear that certain things should be happening, don't take advice from people who haven't been where you are. Take advice from me. That's why we signed that piece of paper. And if you don't want to take advice from me anymore, that's okay too. You can go take advice from someone else. But while we're doing this together, we're walking side by side. So walk with me and let's have that talk.
Wise. The wisdom of Wayne. I love this.
Well, it really comes down to, like, I market people. I market people who make art. And so that relationship is more important to me than anything else. When a client comes to me and goes, listen, I know that when we look back at last year and we just didn't have the revenue that we had last time, and I'm sorry, I want to apologize for that. We're going to try, I'm going to work harder. I say, I don't care. Because our relationship means more to me than how much money comes into the company. People over profit, right? And that brings the right people to M3.
There was a video that you sent me just a little while ago too that was talking about that. Just putting yourselves around the right people makes a huge difference in what kind of outcomes you end up with. Can you talk a little bit more about it? Makes for a happy
Wayne. It makes for a happy client, right? It makes for a happy scenario. Doesn't mean that we don't have really bad days. It doesn't mean that I don't get phone calls that say, yeah, but the deal's falling apart. And I go, all right. But I know when I pick up the phone and call my client that they're prepared for that because I have prepared them. I took responsibility for that. I prepared them that, hey, you know what? If it doesn't come together, there's a reason it didn't come together. So count your blessings. It's like when I got declined yesterday by an artist who was interested in hiring M3, either as a consultant or to be signed. And so I read the email that came through and said, we've decided to go a different direction. And instead of, the old me 10 years ago, 15 years ago, might have walked around and wrung my hands and said, what did I do wrong? How did I mess this one up? I read it and I said, okay, dodged a bullet. And that goes back to mindset too. If they don't think it's the right fit, that's nothing personal for me. I have to not be sensitive to that. So all of it is about the long game and long-term relationships and coming back to people that you want to work with, as opposed to putting together a team because you've ticked all the boxes. Hi, I'm a new artist. I need a manager, check the box. I need a booking agent, check the box, right? I need a social media manager, check the box. Yeah, that doesn't do a whole lot because you could be checking the box with all the wrong people.
It's very common, especially for younger artists or for early stage artists, to feel like the first person that's going to say yes to them is the person, and they're done. Like, got a manager, box checked. Doesn't matter what this manager is actually able to do versus what they promised. That is one of the thing I was saying about artists who want to just find somebody who believes in their vision. And if that first person you get happens to be wonderful, you've won the lottery. That's just so rare to get relationships to click like that, to get the trust to click quickly enough and to actually be real. Like that, all of that stuff is so hard.
It is hard. And how are they supposed to know? One of the things I remind myself all the time, Michael, is the people that I'm talking to on the phone did not go to business school. The people that I'm talking to on the phone do not understand a lot of the branding theory that I have been exposed to for 40 years. The people that I'm talking on the phone have an artistic agenda, and they have to decide whether or not they want to make that a hobby or a career. Aside from that, everything else is just hearsay. It's what they picked up. It's what they've read. It's what they've assumed. It's what they've assimilated from books or what. But even artists that go to music business school, that attend Berkeley, or they still don't have an understanding because they've never lived it, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But the impetus becomes, it falls on us the responsibility to be accountable for having those conversations that allow them to share that they don't know. And it's okay to say, I don't know. What do you want to be when you grow up? I don't know. Okay, fair enough. What do you want to be tomorrow? Right? Let's start there. What do you want to be tomorrow? So, and to walk it through that way and say, okay, how can I help you be there? Right? How can I help you get to where you want to be tomorrow? We'll talk about that, when you grow up another day. But if you don't understand what I mean when I say we have a recoupable advance we have to talk about, then please tell me you don't know what recoupable means. And I'm not going to judge you for not knowing, because you know what? You didn't study it and you're not me. You don't have my job. I don't have yours.
Good way of approaching these things. But one of the other things that I saw on your site that it's kind of your tenets that you all follow is accountability partners. And I love this idea because I think most artists will find a way to need to wiggle out of something that feels uncomfortable at some point. Like how do you do that? What is an accountability partner, and how do you set that up?
It goes back to the two things that we've talked about a lot, which is the relationship, right? An open, communicative, trusting relationship. That's number one. Number two is that goal setting process that we go through, which may seem redundant or boring or heavy or like overly corporate or organizational for something as fluid as a relationship between an artist and a manager. But I think that if we hold ourselves accountable to one another and to ourselves in ways where we can actually look at what happened and what's going to happen. Again, that's how you move the ball forward. I don't care whether or not we move a yard or whether or not we score a goal. I don't care. What I care about is that we're moving in the right direction. And I have to be able to have that accountability conversation with my clients, right? So if they're checked out because of mental health needs, if they're checked out because they're in a new relationship, if they're checked out because they're frustrated with the business, then they're checked out. And it's my job to check them back in. Hi, guess what? You have people that are relying on you. Surprise. It's like going back to if Taylor Swift has 80 people on the payroll, if Taylor decides she wants to retire right now, she's putting 80 families out looking for another job. Right? There's tremendous responsibility that comes with building a career and having people lift you up. You are now accountable to them. And so again, no one's going to teach an artist that. They're going to teach them what a B flat. You can teach them music theory. But who's going to teach them that, okay, well, as you build this team, you're responsible for your team. You want them to be responsible to you. Okay, that's how that works. Again, it is about communication, but the accountability part is that I expect that they will call us out as much as I expect that they will wait for us to call them out. And what that means is, and it comes in the most gentle and beautiful human ways. When a client calls me and says, listen, I needed to schedule this call with you because I have some feedback for you, and I just want to make sure you're in the right place to hear it. To me, that is the most beautiful, generous way to open a conversation with anyone in your life. But for an artist to say that to me, what they're doing is they're parroting what I've done to them. And they're being reciprocal. They're offering me the same thing in a relationship-based conversation. I need to tell you something that I'm frustrated about. Are you open to hearing it right now? And a lot of times we aren't open to hearing advice. We aren't open to hearing feedback. We aren't open to hearing someone just vent because they need to vent. And so what I ask people to do is to take those moments and put them aside and go back and look at them again. Right. So if I have a call with a client, or if a client has a call with me, and it is about accountability, I need to talk to you about how we did this and what I think wasn't okay, that I have to be able to hear it. And I'll take all the notes. I listen. I don't give any feedback, and I put it aside. And when I am in the right mindset, when I am in the right place, when I'm not scrambling to get a contract finished before the end of business day, when I'm not scrambling because I've got 7 companies on a Zoom call, right, one call coming up in 3 hours, and I have to prepare a deck for it. When I'm not doing, in those moments, when I can sit with myself and say, did I let this person down? Do I need to educate them, or do I need to take accountability? And I ask that they do the same thing. So we get very, very real, but accountability is part of the relationship. It's also a part of moving forward. If we're not taking a step, if it's 1 yard, like I said, or whether or not it's a field goal, it doesn't matter. But if we're not moving in that direction, then we need to talk about, well, why, who's accountable for this and why? And we need to be mature about it. We need to be grown-ups.
In the music business?
Right. I know. We're busting out all the norms.
Yeah, I mean, it's refreshing to hear. I think I've been fortunate, too, that most of the managers that I have known and worked with over the years have all kind of had, it seems like, a similar approach I guess maybe I don't like to hang around with people that are sharky and sleazy either. But yeah, I found like in building artistmanagers.io, most of the people that are coming on board are people who are really interested in helping artists. And that seems like a rare thing in the music business, at least amongst the people who are the professionals. But I'm noticing that the artist managers themselves are often the most helpful, and they got into this because they love music and they love helping the people who make it, which is kind of similar to my path. I started as a touring artist, and then the rest of my career has been, how do I help people not do what I had to deal with? And I've seen that through a lot of managers too. It's rare though. I think it's more rare than I'm aware of. I think I'm just very fortunate to have run into the circles that I have run in through. It all becomes a matter of what room are you in? It's like, did you get in the right room with the people who get you, who work with you, or are you kind of keep trying to knock on the door and you're just not getting in, or maybe you don't belong in that room? The music business can be a hard place to be, but I also find when you have a mindset like yours, that it can take on, as I want to say, like a spiritual property where you're bringing good into the world.
I'm the luckiest man on the planet. There's no one, you can't convince me right now that I'm not. Is M3 the biggest management company in the U.S.? No. Are we like climbing all kinds of get to know people lists in trade magazines? No. We move quietly through the world. We do our work with our artists, and that makes me the luckiest guy on the planet. I get to do what fulfills me, and that is to be behind the stage, making sure that they're not distracted by things that shouldn't distract them, to empower them to do what they want to do and let their light go out into the world and influence people and make people feel. The arts are so important, every kind of art. And that's why I've also consulted choreographers and graphic artists and visual artists and all different kinds of other art, because it's still the same principles, the same dynamics, the same metrics apply when you're having those conversations about making someone feel something. How do you make that work? And how do you sustain yourself? You sustain yourself with people that will sustain you, right? So they feed me every bit as much as I feed them. Don't think for a minute that this is all selfless, because it all comes back. It all comes back. And every time someone new comes into the fold, my crew embraces them, and our public roster, our music producer roster, they're a band of musketeers. They're just like, they can't wait to get their hands on somebody else and collaborate with them and work with them and support them. And hold on, where does that happen? Does that happen in insurance? Does that happen in does it happen in any business anywhere? I'm the luckiest guy on the planet.
I can see that, and it makes it super fantastic to even have a chance to talk with you for an hour. So I really appreciate you taking time here this afternoon with this. Do you have any advice for an aspiring artist, a young artist who's trying to get into the music business and make a name for themselves?
I don't think you have enough time for all of that.
I'm sure I do not. Maybe just a pithy one then.
All right. Being aware of your intentions is something that comes with age and with maturity and with time. And I wouldn't suggest that anyone that is a new and burgeoning artist at the age of 18 or 20 or 22 would necessarily have all the capabilities or experience to be able to say, I know exactly what my intentions are. So I'm going to steer away from that side of it. But I will say this. There are the few things that you have to, and this goes back to mindset too, there are a few things that you have to be able to sit down quietly with yourself and figure out what you're willing to do in order to get what you want. One of my first questions for new clients is, what are you willing to sacrifice? And if they say, I don't know, then I say, well, then let's call me when you do. Because until you can have that conversation with yourself and your family, then I don't know where you're at. But the most important thing, especially with consultant clients, people that are coming in to get help from me and my team for a short term and then to leave and go on, and I love those scenarios just as much as I do our signed artists, is you have to be coachable. I have a coach. I have a music manager coach. Your favorite pro athlete, they have a coach. So if you want to enter the world of the music industry and you want to make a name for yourself and support yourself and others in a career that lasts your whole life, you better understand that someone needs to coach you and you need to be able to be coached. And if you come in and say, well, you know what, you're not the right person, or I know more than you do, I am the first one to say, fantastic. I wish you the best of luck. Because I'll put my 40 years of marketing people and moving through all of the different snares and traps that there are in the creative fields. I'll put that 40 years up against your 2 weeks any day. Mm-hmm. And you don't have to look at my roster to know that, right? So that doesn't matter. But to be coachable means that you're going to be brave. It means that you're going to take some risks. This is not for people that want a risk-averse career. This is based on risk. It's all risk. Making music's not risk, but a career in music, yes, absolutely. You have to also be prepared. One of our other mantras is be prepared for your moment. So, I tell people we're going to schedule a photo shoot 2 months before we schedule it. And that's so that they can look how they want to look physically. That's so that they can think about what they want to wear when they get their body where they want it to be. They can think about how they want you can say, well, I want to dye my hair red. Okay, well, let's go ahead and put that in. Like, we're not going to be unprepared for that moment. So you've got 2 months to think about what you want before we get this photographer in the studio. Being prepared is a lot of different things. To be patient, that's a part of being coachable. Understanding that, look, you can either have a Toyota or you can have a Rolls Royce. Which one do you want? Right? That's part of being coachable. Like, I need you to be patient with me. Okay, Wayne, I'll be patient. Right? Great. It will pay off. And if it doesn't, I'll take accountability for it. Ego it drives a lot of the quest for fame, validation, all of those things. And so being humble, that's a part of being coachable too, to be able to be quiet and listen. So it all goes back to that, coachability. And there are plenty of people that have said, I'm going to be your most coachable client. And 3 weeks in, they are the least coachable person I've ever met.
That sounds about right.
Yeah. Living coachability and understanding coachability, two very different things.
Yes. It's like having Yoda on your back. Yeah.
Right, there you go.
Well, Wayne, it's been a pleasure talking with you. I feel like I've learned about a year's worth of music industry knowledge, and it's been a fantastic conversation. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure to be here.
If you enjoyed today's podcast, feel free to send me an email at hello@artistmanagers.io. We'd love to hear from you. We'll see you next time.